Welcome to you today and welcome to our webinar, Scenario Planning, Mindful Insight Beyond the Risk Horizon. So the speaker is Elmar Kutsch and the host is Jonathan Norman. So the first question that's coming up is we want to know, where in the world are you joining us from? So hopefully this will help in terms of social distancing, etc. Maybe you'll see other people that are living nearby. Maybe we'll have some people from the far-flung parts of the world. So thank you for the information that's coming in, and feel free to jump in, Jonathan or Elmar, at any time. So that's brilliant. So let's go on to our next question. And what we want to know here is, what type of project-related job role do you typically perform? And this is going to help Elmar in particular as he addresses the topic of scenario planning. So, and as those who've been on these webinars before, they will know that these role groups are taken from the government's project delivery capability framework. So leaders, those involved in delivery, analysts and change specialists, and PMO, those are the four main groupings. And it's a fairly typical response. So 21% in leadership roles, 56 there you can see in delivery specialists, always the minority, 4% business and analysis and change, and not forgetting PMO related. Good number of you voting, so that's really good. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to hand over to Jonathan now to provide an introduction and a welcome to Elmar.
Elmar Kutsch is an associate professor in risk management at Cranfield School of Management, and as you'll see, he's also a passionate skydiver. And during his career, he's been involved in a number of signature IT projects. What else can I say about Elmar? The final thing is he's also author of several great books on uncertainty and project resilience.
Thank you, Jonathan. And so welcome to the battle of probabilistic risk management versus scenario planning. Scenario planning has been developed by Shell in the 70s, and yet it is somewhat surprising to see that it's not being advocated as a core technique in major project management frameworks. So let's see who's going to win, probabilistic risk management or scenario planning. And I need you to help me to figure out of how I can stay alive while skydiving. Right.
Your question to people, what is your level of experience with scenario planning? So I take it you can see the results coming in, Elmar?
Yes, they're very small, but it appears, there's a big bar that says not used in any shape or form. Fantastic. So hopefully then this means you might even learn something with this little webinar on scenario planning. Good. So what I've been able to see there, that some of you have extensive experience and a great deal, not that much experience. So I hope I can get across a message about, please, please, please use scenario planning as much as possible. But in order to sell the idea of scenario planning, I first have to share a problem with you. And this is my problem, skydiving. I could have referred to my shortest career as a project manager, but I'd rather prefer to look at this more exciting context of skydiving. So this is a skydive we did 2 years ago over the Algarve, when social distancing was still not a question. You see, we're quite close together there in the door. And I have to explain you of what we do in advance of such a skydive. In advance of such a skydive, we plan for it. We break up the skydive into its parts, and then on the ground we rehearse this skydive over and over and over again. So it's very similar of how I started managing my projects. I planned for it. I came up with a plan and I rehearsed this plan over and over again. So once I jumped out of this door at 12,500 feet, I only have roughly 60 seconds to exercise this plan, to put this skydive into the air. But what you see now is a few things happened. Oh my goodness, some things went wrong in the skydive. A skydiver's reserve handle got loose. Another skydiver observed this abnormality, swooped towards him and told him, something wrong is happening here. We have to deviate from our plan and we have to solve the situation. And in this context, nothing went wrong. Something really serious could have gone wrong, because if you have a reserve handle flapping about, it might lead to premature opening, it might lead to canopy collision, which tend to end fatal. However, nothing went wrong. But, so where's my problem? So the problem is, after this skydive, I thought about myself, wait a second, what did you do? How did you react to this situation? And I have to admit that I reacted to this notion of abnormality in a very much mindless manner. Why? Because I was still skydiving in the past. I still had this plan in my mind and I was wedded to this plan. But wait a second, did I not do everything that I was supposed to do in a project? I planned for it. I looked into the past and I referred to the risks that I encountered in the past. And I had these risks in my mind. And yet when it came to a situation where something out of the ordinary happened, I had a problem. I had a problem of normalcy. I was expecting normality. So I was surprised that something out of the ordinary happened. I was influenced by optimism bias. Hey, I have done 850 jumps and nothing ever happened. So in this jump, nothing should actually happen. There was hindsight bias. On the ground, when I planned for this skydive, I was referring to the past of how I did these formations or was part of these formations in the past. And based on this degree of optimism bias and the expectation of normalcy, I put a big anchor into this ground called expectation. But once this expectation of normality was not met anymore, I was screwed. I didn't know anymore what to do. I wasn't ready and prepared for the unexpected. I wasn't ready and prepared for the unknown. So, in regards to this battle between probabilistic risk management and scenario planning, I would love to ask you now, what do you suggest I should have done? I should have relied on probabilistic risk management, or I should have relied on scenario planning? Let's have a look. So, if I were to rely on probabilistic risk management, then you're probably very familiar with this color coding, probability and impact, and you multiply those and it allows you to prioritize your risks. Through probabilistic risk management, I would have embedded, digested the information that dying in skydiving is less likely than driving a car. It's much less likely than driving a car. So, and I would ask you now, would this help me to address normalcy bias? Would this help me to address my own optimism bias? Would this help me to address anchoring bias? Would this help me to debias myself in order for me to engage more mindfully to a skydive, to the next skydive, where I might encounter something I haven't encountered before? I leave you with this question. Personally, I would say, if I now look at these probabilities, I would say, hey, if there's a lower chance of dying in a skydive and dying in a car, what I do on a daily basis, I would say, no, it probably would have reinforced my optimism. Hey, so nothing will go wrong. I don't have to ready and prepare myself for the unexpected. Now, you already heard that I'm somewhat skeptical about probabilistic risk management. Okay, I'll give you a story. Now, when I started off in my shortest career as a project manager, I was working as an IT project manager in Germany. And as a fresh graduate, I had a bit of an issue of, hey, what am I going to do? So I was being given a framework that advocated and made me compliant to probabilistic risk management. So you look at risks in isolation, you assess those risks in terms of probability and impact, and then you allocate a response to it. I did this. Quite quickly, it turned into a somewhat frustrating experience that you might share with me. So we came together and we had different perceptions about probabilities and impact. Somebody said 80% and the other one said 30%. And then, oh my goodness, who's right now? In order to accommodate different perspectives, we simply took the average. Oh my goodness, how good is that? And then we moved on. We had a long risk register that gave us, and I would like to say now, an illusion of control. And it looked good. Hey, wait a second. Are we not in control of all the risks? Yes, we were all in control, or we thought we were in control of those risks that happened repeatedly in the past. And yet, the next thing was something that wasn't on the risk register. And as a result, it became frustrating because, hey, wait a second, I thought we covered all eventualities with the risk register, but we didn't. So then we focused our attention much more to the unexpected that didn't show up on the risk register than what we put on the risk register. And somewhat I would like to say this, it becomes frustrating because then a lot of the things we prepared for in terms of risk register flew out of the window. And I just see that there are a few things about probabilistic risk management, and it's still very small, so I try to read it. Limited, good method. Okay, so there are some conflicting, different opinions about it. Can be manipulated. Oh yes, you can use risk management to manipulate, to scream out for resources otherwise you wouldn't get. Good if implemented properly. It's also a nice insight. Yes, possibly as a tool it is useful to carry out, and yet it has to be implemented properly. Could be used particularly for novel projects. Now I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate. If it's a novel project, the technique is defined to look into the past, because of probabilistic risk management. So how can you possibly use it for a novel project if the technique itself doesn't lend itself for novelty? Just a devil's advocate. Too subjective? Yeah, but this is the issue. We always have to deal with subjectivity. What if we don't know the future? All our imagination, projection beyond the risk horizon remains subjective because we don't have the facts yet. We might use the past, and yet often the past is a limited predicator for the future. Can be misleading. It's a controlled analysis of risk. However, I just want to say, maybe it gives you the illusion of control by relying on a control process. There's so much coming in there. Illusion of control, yes, could reinforce this. So thank you very much for all these inputs. And I heard it seems like there's a bit of a camp. Yes, I like it very much. And there's a camp like, maybe not so. Okay, great. You probably know which camp I have joined, but it's not about me, it's about what you think is most appropriate in your own project. So I move forward. Right, so let's have a quick look, a quick glimpse into scenario planning, where risk management allows you to predict the most probable future. Scenario planning allows you to look at different pathways, allows you to make sense of multiple futures. And in addition, most concepts of scenario planning also include an analysis of the best case scenario and the worst case scenario. And I simply want to give you a bit of a crash course into how to apply scenario planning. At the start of scenario planning, you start off with a problem statement. And in terms of skydiving, I asked you before, you need to help me now with skydiving. I want to avoid getting injured, seriously injured. So at the start of scenario planning, you define your problem statement. Once you have defined your problem statement, you then could do the following. You look at critical uncertainties which significantly influence your problem statement. And you can make sense of these critical uncertainties in terms of the level of uncertainty and uncontrollability. In the context of skydiving, this could mean, oh, I have a parachute. I have some control over my parachute. And I somewhat know how it works. So there's relatively low uncontrollability and relatively low uncertainty. Okay? And then you continue mapping all these critical uncertainties that you believe influence your problem statement. Good habits and bad habits. My good habits or my bad habits. Sometimes I'm tired when I show up on a drop zone. I'm tired, I'm just knackered. So I know I'm not that alert as I should be. Sometimes I'm refreshed. I'm in a good state of mind that allows me to engage with something like skydiving. The weather. The weather can't be predicted. In skydiving, we have a good notion of how the weather will unfold rather than 2 hours ahead of a skydive. So high uncontrollability and somewhat high degree of uncertainty. And finally, I have mapped another one, other people. What I tend to do is something called big wave skydiving. So I jump with other people. I'm depending on other people and they do depend on me too. However, how much control do I believe I have over these other people? Yeah, sometimes they're strangers that probably don't have much control over. How certain am I about their behavior in the air and on the ground that I'm so dependent upon? Not much. Once you have mapped your critical uncertainties, then the next step is simple. You just take the 2 most uncontrollable and uncertain factors, which then drive your 4 scenarios. So, my most uncontrollable and most uncertain drivers were other people and the weather. And in the form of a simple polarity map, bad weather, good weather, I'm surrounded by newbies and I'm dependent on experts. You then have an opportunity to turn these 2 major critical uncertainties into 4 scenarios. Let's have a look how these look like. So my worst case scenario is not a minus, bad weather and surrounded by newbies. No, my worst case scenario, where the likelihood of me getting seriously injured is greatest, is when there's good weather and when I'm surrounded by people like me with a little experience, or people who believe they have a high experience, but ultimately they do not have a high experience. And this is interesting, that this is my worst case scenario, because under this scenario, there's the greatest chance of normalcy bias, anchoring bias, hindsight bias, and all the other bias you can think of, that make me step into this plane and I'm not ready and prepared for the unexpected. it is only one scenario, the worst case scenario. My best case scenario is it's good weather and I'm surrounded by experts. I'm surrounded by experts who speak up if they see something is going wrong. Experts I can rely on, experts who challenge my own mind and who I can ask and tap into in order to form my own survival during a skydive. But scenario planning does not only, like risk management, offer you the most probable future, but also offers you 4 futures, or 7, the more critical uncertainties you incorporate in your scenario planning. Another one, there are newbies around me and the weather's bad, we don't jump. So what is the downside? There's only boredom. We sit on the ground being bored for hours. And finally, if I'm surrounded by experts, people with knowledge who can help me to become a better skydiver, and the weather's bad, yes, I can have access to those. I can talk to those. We can practice on the ground because we can't get up into the air because the weather is too bad. And now I want to show you so. With probabilistic risk management, it gives me an idea that is very much defined and driven by the past about how likely or probable something is. With scenario planning, it gives me a wider range of futures, not just the most probable, but a wider range of futures, worst case and best case, where you can educate yourself and your stakeholders about what is the worst case scenario we need to prevent from happening, and what is the ideal best case scenario. And if we can't achieve the best case scenario and or avoid the worst case scenario, what alternative futures can I make myself ready to and prepare myself for, as well as with stakeholders? Instead of selling, and I did this in my short-lived career as a project manager, I sold the, in brackets, illusion of a best case scenario. The more I planned for it, the more I believed it. So a lot of things out of the ordinary came as a surprise. And what I didn't do is to ready myself and ready my people around me and stakeholders that there's more than the most probable future out there. This is an overview of one of the scenario planning flip chart sheets that one of our that mature civil servants, so senior civil servants, not mature, senior civil servants created on our PLP program, Project Leadership Program. It's a simple map with not too much detail in regards to the construction of a stadium, where you label each scenario, where each labeling creates creativity around the story of what could it mean, where ambiguity around these 4 scenarios is expected because people have different expectations and perceptions about these different scenarios, where it drives a discussion beyond the risk horizon. This scenario planning could be as simple as you see there or what you see on the next slide. So nothing sophisticated. Something that does not provide you with the accuracy about your predictions, which you will never have anyway in a novel project, but something that allows you to mindfully venture beyond what you know from the past. And in this example, you also see some triggering points. So again, no probabilities, simple triggering points that indicate which scenario you might end up without adding this illusion of certainty by defining probabilities. Now that I try to sell you scenario planning, I'm preaching you. I would like you now to comment on what you think of scenario planning. Launching the next one about scenario planning. So what do you think? Do you agree with me? It is the Holy Grail. It's the best thing since sliced bread. Oh yes, what I already see is good. Thank you very much. I feel the love for scenario planning. Useful, necessary, love it. Oh yeah, good. Oh, good. I wish I could give you all a hug, but fine. Beneficial, necessary, yes, possibly, yeah. Interesting, yes, it is interesting, because all these tools that we are being told to comply to, I wonder, do they make us more mindless? And although it has a negative connotation, it makes us also more efficient, so it's something positive. Or does it make us more mindful? Does it allow us to embrace the things we don't know yet, or the things we haven't experienced yet? So the rebellion is still winning, I see, in terms of useful, interesting, and necessary. Good. So we're going to beat the dark side of probabilistic risk management like that. So overall, it appears that you seem to like the notion of scenario planning, as I do. If I were to go back to this person, and it's not long ago, 20 years ago, I would say, please, do not just pay attention to those things you believe you know, but also start adopting some tools that allow you to make sense of what you don't know. And in this case, I have to say I'm a little bit sad, because all these interpretive, creative methods like scenario planning, rich pictures, mass mapping, are not really being embraced by the project management profession. Despite that, or in contrast, I feel, and please allow me this feeling, that a lot of these techniques and tools are more appropriate in an operation rather than it is appropriate in a project. So thank you for giving me so much love in regards to scenario planning, although I just gave you a bit of a crash course into it. Okay. Now I want to ask you something. So going back to skydiving, this was a picture made ahead of my first balloon jump, my first ever balloon jump. And for me, this was a novel project, because in a balloon, or balloon jump entails jumping out of a height, altitude of 5,000 feet instead of 12,500 feet. And to make matters worse, this balloon is moving, so you never know where you're going to land. So now I need your help. What shall I do? Shall I focus on my experience? Shall I analyze my experience? Shall I analyze these 850 jumps that I've done to inform how I can engage with a balloon jump? Or shall I embrace a form of scenario planning, where I start thinking about what is the worst case, ending up in a wheelchair? What is the best case? Nothing goes wrong. Shall I embrace more than one future? Shall I embrace 10, 15 in order to appreciate the richness of futures that I could face during this balloon jump? So what do you suggest? A combination of both. I thought previously I'd get you towards joining the rebellion, but you're quite right. Most of you're arguing to use both. But I wonder in which sequence. Maybe first using risk management and then scenario planning, or in order to widen your horizon about the multiplicity, I'm not sure that it is a word, about the range of futures you might encounter. Maybe as a first step, embrace scenario planning. And then once you have identified relevant scenarios, then break down these scenarios increase your comprehension and understanding about these scenarios by deploying probabilistic risk management. Might be a way, but be aware. And again, I play devil's advocate. The more you apply probabilistic risk management, the more it might reinforce your hindsight bias. The more you create an anchor called the past that you then expect to replicate in the future. However, stakeholders and people like me, we're lying for certainty, isn't it? Your stakeholders probably ask you for certainty on a daily basis. And although we can't deliver 100% certainty about the future state of a project, we could use scenario planning in order to educate on what we don't know yet. And more so than risk management, to say what we do know. But I would like you, I'm German, so I can say I want you. No, I would like you to always think about, what do I pay attention to? To what I believe I know about the future state of a project? Or shall I pay attention to what I don't know yet? Make sense of what I do not know yet. Shall I provide my stakeholders with this illusion of certainty because it provides us with a comfortable feeling? Or shall I make people uncomfortable by telling, educating, trying to comprehend of what we do not know yet? In my short-lived career as a project manager, I did the former. I sold the illusion of certainty because it told me and others that I'm a good planner. So I made it up in the end. And when my plan didn't fit the situation anymore, I was called a bad planner. But you know what? I blame somebody else, or I blame the process for this. There's always a choice. Do we focus on what we know, driven by the past, or do we focus on what we don't know? How far do we venture beyond the risk horizon until it really becomes uncomfortable? So thank you very much. So what I do is, next time I join something novel, I will try to do a combination of both. So we did this. Thank you very much for this answer about what you suggest I should do, combination of both. And I just want to tell you what I have done. And it might sound crazy. I knew that I'm facing a novel situation that I have to deal with. And you suggested me that I should probably look at both. I should look at my experience that is driven by my past experiences from the past, or shall I do some scenario planning? I think I did a mixture of both. I relied on what I knew from skydiving out of a plane, and yet I did something in addition. I thought about a worst case scenario. I did more than thinking about it. I wanted to feel, it sounds crazy. I wanted to feel with my senses of what it means to be confronted with a worst case scenario. So, and it's no joke what I do now, what I'm saying now. I really did this. I took a chair, I sat down, and then I imagined that if I end up in a wheelchair, I will never be able to leave this wheelchair. It was not only uncomfortable, it was unnerving. It made me somewhat, I would say, anxious. But this feeling of discomfort, or now I use the words of James Reason, of unease, then triggered a thinking process in me. I have to raise questions, otherwise I wouldn't raise. I have to confront myself with different scenarios, otherwise wouldn't be raised or defined. So ahead of this skydive, we all met on the ground, And I was still in a state of, Christ, I have to avert this worst case scenario from happening. And then I asked a lot of stupid questions. A lot of stupid but important questions otherwise would be raised. So I spoke with a dude who's flying this balloon, this basket, and said, so what happens? You have experience. Tell me about multiple futures I might encounter. But allow me to think about in advance of how I can engage with these multiple futures. So this guy, like, oh, interesting that you asked me all these questions. And he took his time to explain to me of what futures I might encounter. I went back and mentally engaged with these futures. Would I have engaged with these multiple futures if I just relied on probabilistic risk management, my track record of skydiving? Maybe not so. I would have stepped into this basket and simply, based on my optimism and experience that I think I have, I would have thought, I have this under control. So what I try to do now, not only in terms of skydiving, is ahead of a problem, I try to take a step back and I first think about the worst case scenario, not only think about it, but I would like to make it feel. Feeling it in a safe environment that triggers this unease in me and then allows me to raise questions about multiple futures otherwise I wouldn't have raised. But I need this state of unease. Right? Good. Of course, this is not all about skydiving. I would love you to go skydiving. It's a wonderful feeling. And so hopefully after the COVID-19 crisis, when social distancing is a thing of the past, you can go skydiving. You heard it. It's much safer than driving a car. So what I did here is I gave you crash course into scenario planning, and I think I was somewhat successful to get you join the rebellion, how to endeavor the realm beyond the risk horizon of what we think we know. Of course, I have to put food on the table, so feel free, if you're interested into this concept of thinking and acting beyond the risk horizon and organizational resilience, feel free to buy these two books. Mindful Project Management is coming out in June, and The Art of Organizational Resilience, which looks at the fall of France in 1940. Sounds a bit wacky, but hopefully it's quite interesting. So there we are at the end of this crash course into mindfulness, venturing beyond the risk horizon. I hope you have enjoyed it. We have some time for questions.
We do. I'm really excited about this. We've probably got 15 minutes, so that's brilliant. And there's some fantastic questions coming that I'm going to hand over to Jonathan in just a moment. Elmar, you might not know this, but we look for immediate feedback or reflective practice on webinars. So we've asked, what have you learned or what will you do differently as a result of attending this webinar? So we've got some intentionality there. And if I just hover over this bit here, then it links through to things like professional development as per our Road to Chartered series. So you're already getting some strong feedback in here. I suspect you have done a fair amount of persuading of people of your views, but we'll be able to look at those. People can continue to enter that, but you know, that's fantastic stuff. Flick forward to your contact details there at Cranfield School of Management and LinkedIn. I know that you would like to connect with a lot of people, and then I'm going to hand over to Jonathan, who's got a whole barrage of questions.
Thanks ever so much. So let's go on to the questions. So I've got a question here from Aditayo, and it says, what are the challenges to implementing scenario planning mentality to the entire team or organization? If you've only got the leader who's trying to push scenario planning, it's going to be less meaningful. So how do you get everybody on board?
Yeah. And this is probably also a question about how do we make people buy into scenario planning and the results of scenario planning. As I said before, it might provide you with an inconvenient truth. that there is a worst case scenario. So the first thing, in order to get people buy into it, is to look at, maybe in the same manner what I just did. When you start a project, you will be asked to choose from a range of techniques. And maybe the first question is, what does it do? How does it help me to deal with the expected that is important? But how does it also help me to deal with the unexpected? In many organizations that we have researched, it feels like, oh, people are given tools without thinking of, why do I do this? And does it help me to ready and prepare myself for the unknown or not? And then once people have realized, aha, so this tool helps me to ready and prepare myself for the unknown. Maybe this is the biggest buy-in or the biggest commitment that you can create to adopt and be compliant to a tool and technique that are often sold as self-evidently correct. Yeah, if you just use all these tools, you will be fine. But maybe first taking a step back and asking yourself, what does it do? And how does it mentally ready and prepare myself for the unknown?
Very good. I'm guessing you could start by introducing it quite subtly by just asking some questions and exploring how people see the future without necessarily saying, right, we're now going to do scenario planning, which might be a bit off-putting for people.
Yes. So scenario planning in the simplest form is simply asking, what if? Yeah. What if?
Good. I have a question from Michelle. Who says, what do you mean by uncontrollability, and how is this different from uncertainty?
So uncertainty refers to the lack of knowledge we have about a future state. So with a lot of future states of a project, we always have incomplete knowledge. So uncertainty relates to the degree in regards to the lack of knowledge we might have about a future state of a project, how something will unfold. Uncontrollability is often also a criteria that is being used in probabilistic risk management. So once you have identified or prioritized the risks in terms of probability and impact, you can then ask yourself, do I have control over this risk? Do I have enough resources? Do I have enough authority? Am I empowered to deal with this risk? So uncertainty is about the lack of knowledge I have about a risk or I have about a scenario. And uncontrollability is the extent to which I think I have control over a risk or a scenario. Okay,
good. Andrew asks, any thoughts on using scenario planning to select the, in inverted commas, right project?
Yes, oh yes. Welcome to the rebellion. Yes, and at the end it would, with scenario planning and in combination with a pre-mortem, you can say, shall we do this project or not? If you come up with a worst case scenario that in alignment with your analysis of critical uncertainties, you can't control, then don't do the project. So scenario planning also allows you, when you look at critical uncertainties and the polarity map, to identify whether you are able to prevent a worst case scenario from materializing. And if the answer is no with pre-mortem, the answer is no, I can't prevent this worst case scenario from happening because of too much uncertainty and too much uncontrollability, don't do it. And select the one that has lesser uncertainty and lesser uncontrollability.
Okay. Victor has asked, how does this fit with techniques like the Cynefin framework? It appears they might be complementary. Any thoughts?
The Cynefin framework, yes, it's about complexity science. And I have to admit, although I know it from an academic perspective, I still believe it's highly theoretical. Although I guess out there are tools that are based on the Cynefin framework that are probably work. now that I can't give an answer to this, I would simply ask the one who has posted this question, does it help you? Do you think it will help you to venture beyond what you believe you know? If there's a question, then use it. If it's not, then it focus your attention and mind towards the expected.
Excellent, good. John asks, is there an accessible toolkit you would recommend to guide a beginner to scenario planning?
Now, this is not a question that I raised, but guess what my answer is?
Yeah.
Read the book. No, okay. No, look, you can buy the book and you can read the book, but there's so many practitioner frameworks on scenario planning. If you just Google how to do scenario planning, you might come across the way that I have conveyed in this webinar, but you might find a different way of scenario planning. There are probably some techniques that are better than others. Feel free to go wild to identify which different types of scenario planning there are in the world, and then choose one that you're most comfortable with. That enables you, it's again a subjective measure that enables you to think and as a result act beyond the risk horizon. But buy the book, please.
Excellent, good. I've got a great question here from Eckhard, who asks, a lot of project managers are focused on delivering a specific set of outcomes. If you ask them to consider different outcomes, you may be moving them out of their comfort zone. How can project leaders and sponsors overcome this natural psychological barrier, this reticence perhaps amongst project managers who prefer working to specific outcomes?
Yes, and this relates to our natural tendency to long for certainty. I long for certainty. I long for stability. So in order to serve this feeling of comfort and certainty, I did sell certainty. And I have to say also, the more I planned for a project, the more detailed my planning was, the more certain I was about a future state of the project. The opposite side would be to create a culture and a notion and a feeling of, and now I use again Charles Reason's word of unease. In my book, I wrote to make people uncomfortable about how much we don't know and how little we can predict the future. But there's a risk. There are two options you might have as a project manager. I sell certainty, or I tell myself and my stakeholders that the future will largely remain unknown. But in order to deal with an unknown and unexpected future, I do not sell certainty, but I sell a capability to deal with uncertainty, volatility, ambiguity, and complexity. So on one hand, you say, look at all my planning, how great it is. This is how the future will unfold. This is how the project will be unfolding. It's one option. Or the other option is say, I just don't know what's going to happen in the next or beyond the horizon of 6 weeks. But what I can sell you as a project leader is my capability to adapt, my capability of resilience. There are two ways, but the problem is, who would you believe? Who would you buy into? The one who sells you certainty, or the one who sells, I don't really know, but I'm selling you my capability of adapting, adjusting, amending, being resilient in the face of uncertainty. Easier said than done.
Yeah, yeah. Zoe's asked a great question here, which is, what's your top tip for delivering the message to clients which makes them uneasy? I was thinking as I was reading that question, I was thinking about Dr. Fauci in the US having to communicate with Donald Trump. So any advice on how do you communicate this message that you know is going to make the client uneasy, and in essence you want them to be uneasy?
Yes. And this could start with the language you're using. And now I put my academic hat on when we write academic papers, because the world out there is so difficult to understand. So we revert to language like may or might. By just using the word of may or might, by not using single point estimates, you already use a language that incorporates and conveys volatility, something might change, uncertainty, we don't know, ambiguity, oh, we have different perceptions of it, and complexity. If something fails, it might have an organ effect on something else and might quickly turn into worst case. This might already make people uncomfortable. Shouldn't lead to anxiety, should make people uncomfortable. But it also makes people appreciative. Oh, I'm glad you're open. I'm glad that you just told me you're not a godlike creature. I'm glad that you now gave me an impression that we might or may end up with a different outcome. And yet, when we hear often single point estimates, might just be probability, might be a completion date. What happens? Anchoring bias kicks in. But you told us that we would finish it in 3 years' time. So coming back to the question, I'm rambling on, it is about using language that conveys uncertainty, volatility, complexity, and that allows and accommodates ambiguity. Again, easier said than done. Because what many stakeholders are longing for is the opposite to volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity.
Very good. Is there an optimum number of scenarios before people suffer from being overloaded?
Yes. And there the extreme is the more scenarios you have, you're becoming more and more paralyzed because you keep on going defining more and more scenarios. I don't have an answer to that, to say what is the ultimate ideal number of scenarios. Traditionally, it is 4. Yet, if you just add one more critical uncertainty, it would be 7. So my suggestion is get a feel for it. At what time do you say, stop? At what time do you say, we have now engaged our thinking about a range of scenarios that might cover all those, and now I say it, I know I'm joining on the dark side, likely scenarios. So you're focusing only on the scenarios that you think may or might happen. Then you say, no, we're going to stop. Because at one stage, you might push it so far that you say, oh, scenario is aliens will attack the world. It's a scenario, but it's becoming so remote that it is not worthwhile paying more attention to. Now, this raises the question again, but hey, wait a second, are we now excluding the black swan? Coming back to the question is, I don't know. I would suggest then that you get a feeling for at what stage do you stop for looking for more scenarios. You should stop when you believe a scenario that you have extracted is too remote to think of, like aliens attack the world.
Massive thank you to you, Elmar. You've got some fantastic feedback. So enjoy your afternoon.